the most boring part of Gen AI is the data pipeline. So if you can chat to me after, I didn't want to grab the mic while I was going around, but I'm definitely interested in talking to anyone who cares about data pipelines.
It is phenomenal. Community work, actually at work, so fast. That's amazing. Hi, everyone. My name is Nandita, so sitting right under. So in case you forget, that's a reminder. In case you are wondering how it's pronounced, it's Nandita. I will be actually the facilitator for today, and really excited to have this discussion with our three really stalwart startups from within Microsoft Startups portfolio. One thing that I would say is that we did hear that there are a few folks with open source projects. You are maybe thinking about starting a startup, but there's a lot of initial hesitation, or there's a lot of initial flux when you're thinking about it, or these are scaling startups. And so that's something that we'll also go deeper into on how do you think about breaking that barrier or crossing the chasm. And so please join your hands today as we discuss all these things with our three expert founders, head of marketing in this panel discussion. I personally am a technical PM within Microsoft Startups, so I get to interact with founders on a day-to-day basis, and I'm really excited to bring this interaction with all of us. And so with that, the way I would actually want to kick off is I can give my version of your introduction, but instead of doing that, and this is not because we didn't do my research, because I did do, see, there's the output of an LLM as well as a lot of research. But instead of actually talking about how you started your company, or what you do, or why do you do what you do, I would love to actually hear it from you in a slightly different flavor. So instead of asking you to introduce yourself, what I would ask you is, what you do right now, what inspired you to do it? Why did you choose that specific problem? And we will kick off with that. So Viren, we'll start with you. If you can shed some light on what you do right now and what inspired you. Why do you do what you do?
Sure. So I'm a co-founder and a CTO at Orkes, but the fun part of being a co-founder is that the title is just there because it has to be there. You pretty much do everything, anything that is required to keep the lights on and product to continue to grow. So my day-to-day is mostly focused on product and engineering. I still do a lot of coding as well, work with the customers, fight the fires if required, but that's pretty much is my kind of day-to-day, right? Day and night, weekends, whatever it takes. Yes. What inspired? So really, the primary motivation for me to start Orkes was I had built out the open source project, and I had already seen that being adopted across multiple industries. Oftentimes people asking for advice or help, reaching out on LinkedIn. Even after I left the Netflix where I kind of built the project, that kind of continued to happen. And at the same time, I saw there was kind of a need for a similar kind of a platform and a product. So I felt was that there was a problem that was out there in the market. The product had, or the project itself had the project market fit that was kind of proven. And it made sense to kind of take the next step and see what can I do from here. And yeah, that was it.
Very interesting. So on the same thread, Chris, if I ask you, why did you choose to work with Unstructured, and why Unstructured? Why the specific problem statement? What is Unstructured and why Unstructured?
Yeah, so I think about Unstructured as ETL for LLMs. How do you move the data that you need to your large language model? And I've got a very similar life story to you. I've got the strangest title you'll ever hear, the head of product marketing and solution architecture. I also run partnerships, developer relations. My documentation team is here as well. And it's exactly how you mentioned it. It's just something different every day. We got into the problem space back 2018, 2019. We were working with a lot of BERT, BART, traditional NLP. named entity recognition, RELX, sentiment. We produced like a library of 30 models. They were like super cool, really exciting models. We had one of them that was a BERT model that read tweets and then predicted with, at first, 97% accuracy that that news story would blow up on Twitter within 3 days. The accuracy went down to about 64% when we realized it was just selecting Kim Kardashian stories. Trained that out of the model, it wasn't as good, but we had 30 of these models and we go everywhere. We trained them on news data from LexisNexis because that was what was widely available to us. And we go to places where we say, look at these models, they're so great, look how powerful they are. Watch them pull all the named entities out of this document. And they'd be like, wow, that's so great. Can I use it on my data? I'm like, no, we trained them on news. You'll have to retrain them all on your own data. So then from the birth of that, we slowly started thinking, right, how can we actually get the data that we need into unstructured data? And that's where unstructured came from. We just focus on that 80% of data that's unstructured, lives inside your organization, and getting that made available to large language models.
Interesting, interesting. And so Kirat, for you, I'll put one other flavor to the story. So like one deeper aspect where I want you to go is, what is Osmos, of course? Why did you start it? And then was Osmos always what it is today? What were the hurdles and why do you choose to still continue and double down?
Yeah, I can answer that. So there's a complicated mesh of history that brought me to where I am, but there's key milestones. One milestone that's really struck with me is we got to move to the US on the diversity lottery. My dad got to apply years ago, very complicated history there. But a distinct memory is him getting frustrated at, unfortunately, Microsoft Word with the paragraph markers and just walking away. Like it stuck with me that Silicon Valley, like we've built these tools that are for ourselves. Like there's this lack of empathy in software that we build for everyday people, right? So that's one theme of it. The second theme is I've done what I call the Seattle tour of duty, right? I've worked at the hyperscalers, Azure included, and everywhere I worked, I saw so much energy, human toil going into just moving data around between systems. And it was mundane, it was waste of like human inventiveness in doing that. And so kind of putting those two things together, kind of the motivation for Osmos has been, how do you completely remove human toil from the act of machines talking to each other? So if you think about, I can talk to anyone in the world with WhatsApp, plus add in a translation engine, and I can talk to someone in Beijing fluently, right? But somehow, my Dynamics and your SharePoint can't talk to each other. And we have to put a human in the middle on the sender side and a human on the middle on the receiver side. And so what we set out to solve was how do we help companies exchange data easier without this toil? And what that has evolved over 5 years of, seriously, and we're gonna get into this, right? Some of the hard questions is, what we've realized is a key part of solving a large problem like this is you have to understand their power dynamics and where do you solve it. And so what we do today is we help organizations fully autonomously ingest data into their data warehouse, specifically Microsoft Fabric. And so the idea is you've got all this data coming at you internally, different teams from your partners, vendors, customers. How do you completely remove the need for a human to do any sort of ETL, whether it's manual ETL through Excel or through writing one-off Python scripts? How do you get rid of all of that? Let the machine do the thing and let it ask you when it needs your help. And so that's kind of where we're headed, which is, one, don't build software for yourself. So don't do things like code gen, and then when it breaks, ask a human developer to fix it. Like, you've not solved the problem, right? Empower everyone to solve the hard problems here. So that's the motivator.
Very interesting, and that's the underlying. Empower everyone to achieve more.
Yeah.
Rings a bell. Phenomenal.
I hadn't even put that together till this moment. There you go.
For those who, just for the connection, empower everyone, every person on the planet to achieve more. It's just Microsoft's motto. So thank you for that. And thank you for actually walking us through. It's a very interesting that what you exactly mentioned, that there are these challenges that we have made difficult for people to process, like structured data, unstructured data. How does it all come together? Why is it the most meaningful problem, one of the most meaningful problems for a developer to solve? And once we have that come together, how do we orchestrate this right to actually, like, literally empower everyone to build and, like, literally let them free from all the, in some form and function, I would call it slog work. So really appreciate that, and thank you for sharing that. So with that, let's go slightly deeper, because we are talking to a heavily tech audience today. So we'll slightly go deeper into the product side before we move into your startup journey. And so thinking about that, Kirat, I'll start with you. So how does the AI-powered data transformation that you're mentioning, powering the fabric, what are some of the ways in which businesses have adopted this?
Yeah, sure. I can talk about that. So an incredible thing to learn along the way is your investors will tell you, go focus on a vertical. And if you are fortunate or unfortunate enough, you'll realize that the product you're building applies to every vertical. So one of the harder parts, probably relatable to you, is focusing. And so I'll give you two examples that are concrete. We have a Fortune 550, I don't know how those numbers work these days, they're different, but very large organization that does vendor payments at scale for all the way to the US government. And they receive, oh my God, the crazy, like things labeled CSVs that are not anything like a CSV. And they run a $100 billion business off of it with stalled growth, can't add customers. And so we are helping them fully automate this entire transaction ingestion flow so that it can go from received transaction file to paid as soon as possible. And today, as soon as possible used to be a week, down to 24 hours, going down further. Another example is a very large, I'll call it consumer packaged goods company that we'll talk about next week. Their products may or may not be in refrigerators down the hall. They work with a lot of retailers around understanding how pricing is impacting consumption at scale globally, right? And so they get all this data, which you would think, oh, there's got to be APIs for that. Yes, there are. No one uses them. It's all Excel files. And so how do you bring that in to then power downstream data science flows in their data warehouse, in Fabric in this case, so that they can turn around and run a more efficient business? Two examples. So that's kind of how organizations use us. There's examples in healthcare, there's more examples in fintech, so on and so forth.
Interesting. So very industry agnostic. So very interesting perspective, because a lot, as you mentioned, a lot of times we think about going deeper within industry, but AI has literally changed that, because there are a lot of translatable problem statements.
But to the engineers in the room, I would also say it is an allure you have to be very careful with, because go-to-market will eat your technology for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Solve your go-to-market, the technology will solve itself. So
I hope everyone's notebooks on. Perfect. So from that flavor, Chris, at Unstructured, do you think about niche? Do you think about, like, do you not think about niche? How does it work for Unstructured when you think about your ideal customer persona, the focus group, whatever we call it?
Yeah, like ICP is hell for us. It's like a similar thing. We are a 2-year-old company. The open source software just crossed 17 million downloads. We've got 87 of the Fortune 100 as regular users of that package. We sit there looking at it and going, who's the ICP? What vertical should we focus on first? That's been like a genuinely hard problem for us. And I think it's one that we're lucky to have. Generally, the workloads and problems we solve are in RAG, retrieval augmented generation. So how do you get the 8% of data that's unstructured in a company next to an LLM through connecting to the data, converting it into a canonical JSON source, chunking it, embedding it, enriching it, and then writing it into your vector database of choice. And then we just sit there moving that data all the same. And like something you mentioned earlier is we heard so many people in the early days saying, we need detailed control of this product. We need the chunking strategy, the indexing, the re-ranker. We need full control. So we did that. We did 100 interviews and we built like detailed control. Nobody could use it at all. Even our own engineers couldn't use it at first. So now we've like swung back the other way with it, where you literally come into our product and there's a picture of 2 ice cream sundaes. One's already made for you, and one is just the pieces of an ice cream sundae, and you get to choose which path do you want to go down. Do you want the ready-made sundae, where we've put all the difficult tech together for you, or do you want to go into the sundae where you build it yourself and you get those options?
Oh, wow. Holy shit. So talk about pivot. That was bias pivot in one direction and the other. Very interesting. And so, Viren, if we think about on a similar thread, the AI or like workflow orchestration in general, it can unblock several use cases that people probably wouldn't even have thought about. Just because if something is a very complicated problem to solve, workflow orchestration can actually solve that. What are some of those biggest use cases that you have seen getting unblocked?
I think the biggest one that we have seen, if I were to pick one, right, is, or a few of them, are essentially how do you kind of orchestrate across different components in your application. So, if you think about the entire evolution of the technical stack, right, how we build applications, we have gone from mainframe to fully distributed systems and somewhere in between. And as you kind of keep things more decoupled, either you are using microservices, maybe you are not using microservices, you're using events, but orchestrating across multiple systems is a hard problem. What I'd like to say is that, everybody uses a workflow engine. Either you are using one or building one. So, that's kind of some of the core use cases, right? How do you build systems at scale? And scale does not necessarily mean QPS, by the way. One of the things that we realized also is scale also it means complexity. You could be running very few workflows, but it could be complex enough that needs a lot more in terms of how things are wired, how do you handle failures, compensation. And then very recently, you add the language model to the mix. And then you just made the whole thing more complicated than, so yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? And I'm like really curious. You mentioned one thing, which is either you like in terms of workflows, either you're using one or you're building one. When do you recommend doing one over the other?
So, I mean, of course, I would say you should never build one. And the reason is that,
If you did.
unless you don't find something that fits your kind of, use case, right? But typically what tends to happen is that, if you have a very simple use case, then a lot of times it doesn't make sense to kind of use an existing one. You can just build something on your own and it will be fine. But, workflow engines are state machines, right? Every application has to manage state, all the way from you think about order processing, data ingestions, payment processing, everything is a workflow. It could run from few milliseconds to few years, even few decades, right? We have customers running their workflows for a few decades. So I would say that the moment you start to grow in complexity, you have to start thinking about whether you want to really invest in building one or just use something off the shelf. And there are many of them. We are not the only one.
Very interesting. And so going slightly deeper on that, how did you navigate pre-November 2022 and post-November 2022? Was that relevant in your life? And by November 2022, I mean everyone knows LLM now, post-November 2022. So did that play an impact in the direction that you were taking Orkes in?
So I would say November 2022, you said, right?
Yeah.
Pre and yeah.
Yeah.
So we were just a year-old company, exactly 1 year old in November 2022. And I would say we didn't think too much about it initially. For us, that was happening. We were more let's see where it goes. We were, of course, excited as an engineers. But we really got interested in the potential for what if you mix the concept of a workflow engine with language models, what it can do really late last year. Because an interesting aspect of a workflow engine is that if you take a language model and say, hey, can you build out a workflow to achieve certain things? And if you can make it autonomous, then suddenly you have kind of the foundation of a fully distributed and autonomous agents. And they need a workflow engine. So that was a pivotal moment. And we started kind of working on something on that one. And I would say with whatever we have seen so far in the industry, right, with Microsoft Copilot Studio and other hyperscalers, similar thing, right, it has kind of also validated that, yeah, that's going to happen Now we call that as autonomous agentic workflows.
Mhm.
But yes,
Very interesting. So yeah, use like massive opening of the use cases.
yes,
as
correct.
well.
I mean, I was talking to somebody earlier that like pre-2022, if I were to ask somebody, right, like, what is an orchestration, they would always equate it with Kubernetes. Like there was kind of almost synonym. And I had to go and explain that, okay, it's not just about Kubernetes. Think about your application and you want to orchestrate your services and everything. Today, I don't have to. Everybody knows.
I was checking the like drag and drop and like the very visual stuff. I am an ex-developer. I would have never imagined in my developer life that I would rely on GUI in future, probably like
Yep.
natural language UI, whatever we call it in Microsoft. But now that I visualize it, it's actually crazy.
Yeah.
It's like multiplying the imagination, which is a lot to say as a developer.
That's right.
Oh,
Yeah.
Very interesting. So Chris, if we think about similar, like key trends that Unstructured latched on, or like literally what helped you ride the wave? And it might be November, it might not be. What is it?
Yeah, ChatGPT was huge for me. I can like still remember the moment when I first found it and started playing with it. Like I was at this company doing these BART models. We had 30 of them. It's 11 o'clock at night. I'm at home in bed. Don't worry, this is safe for an audience. My wife's next to me, and I'm like, hey, pick out the named entities out of this paragraph to ChatGPT, and it's like, bum, 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 bum. I'm like, oh. So I said to my wife, ChatGPT can pull out named entities from a document. She's like, what? Shut up, it's 11 o'clock at night. Then I'm like, tell me the sentiment of this paragraph. And it's like positive. I'm like, topics, relation extraction. I go down it, we do them all, right? So I'm just like blown away. I'm like, oh God, this one model can do everything that we've spent the last 2 years working on. So I nudge my wife again. I'm like, it can do topics. And she's like, are you still talking about AI? I was just like blown away by it. And it changed the course of everything. And at Unstructured, we need LLMs more now with the advent of VLMs and multimodal LLMs. So we have a strategy for routing documents where effectively our simplest document, if it's a Word document with extractable text, that'll just go to a fast strategy that we call it. It's just Python. It knows the word scheme. It rips the text. We can't find it with that. We'll use traditional OCR models, object detection, our own trained computer vision models. If we can't find it with that, then it will go to an LLM and a VLM. Like we'll only bring it when we need it to bear, but its results are just incredible. Like we were at a show at Gartner last week with Cassie, our head of GTM, and a guy came over and the two of them sat there and he went, let me try it. So he writes something in Arabic on there, puts her into the VLM in a table. The VLM perfectly transforms it. And the first guy goes, it did it wrong. And then the second guy with him goes, no, you wrote it wrong. And then they agree that the VLM had got it right and they were wrong. So it's been an astounding moment. I just love LLMs. I love anything to do with tech at all. But LLM is the best thing I've seen in my lifetime.
Very interesting. Actually, we talk about hallucinations so much. And I'm going to write your code. That was not wrong. I was wrong. Or my prompt was wrong. It's very interesting. And wow. So actually, Kirat, now again, I like giving you twisters, so probably we'll do that.
Bring it on.
So for twisters, I want you to like tell us both about your roadmap, but also about the productivity of internal team. So one thing that we were just chatting about is that your team just like readied a product within 4 months, which would have taken in a normal roadmap, I'm assuming, what, 1 year in general?
Easy, 18 months, easy.
How did, what are the biggest like key levers that change your roadmap internally and externally?
Okay, so I'm going to try and answer that with this audience in mind and go a little too deep, 2 clicks deeper than we turned on Copilot for everyone, right? Which of course we did, those things we did. The journey goes back to November, which you wake up in the sense of like existential questioning every assumption you had made about how your business is going to go. And you rapidly realize that your biggest threats are not the large players you thought you were going to try to compete with. It's the 2 kids dropping out of Stanford who are going to eat your business overnight and you won't know what happened to you. Okay. And since then, I've lived my life that way. Every day, that's how I live my life. Okay. So we started working on how to grow into this new world from day zero. We were one of the first people approved to the OpenAI API. GPT 3.0, DaVinci 003, trying to make it work. When we didn't have a chat interface, it was just completions. So we've been working on it since then. The learnings have been as much as technology as they've been user experience. We've built and thrown away so much stuff that we were so excited about and we got horribly wrong. And it wasn't the technology's fault. We packaged it wrong. And so all of those learnings earlier this year, I had our entire team read Rich Sutton's writings, The Bitter Lesson. For folks who haven't read it, if you're in this room, it's like required reading. You should like know what it talks about inside out. What it basically talks about is in any recent recorded history of technology, every time we've bet on approaches that take human algorithmic inventiveness and put them against, eventually we're gonna throw more compute at the problem, the compute has won every time. And sort of taking that to heart, I took our entire team, we had this offsite, and we wrote down saying, look, we're a different company today. What we are going to do is we're going to turn everyone in this organization into a developer. You work in sales, you're a developer. Put that mindset on, because the future of what software is going to look like, you're not going to write code for. The code just exists to interface the AI to classical tooling. And so over this 1-year journey, where we've gotten to is this. So next week, we're launching this entire embedded workload on Microsoft Fabric, the first fully autonomous AI data wrangler. That was written in 4 months. We started in August, I think. And the core idea was the engineering team would build an orchestration layer, but the go-to-market team would be involved in how we set up our LLMs to do the actual core active cleaning data. Because when you get into it, people's expectations are different. Oh, I have a column for demographics and I'm married, yes, no. All of us engineers think people want true and false. Of course, that's a Boolean column. I promise you your customers don't want that. There's enough customers that say, no, no, no. I have 3 systems downstream who want yes, no. Why can't your AI do yes, no? Right? So these are all the learnings my go-to-market team had. And so what we've done is we've separated our entire prompt structure from orchestration and empowered everyone in the company to contribute there. And so the intelligence, just our ability to put together a coherent solution, grows very, very rapidly. And the amount of code, like classical code that you have to write tests for, CI/CD, all of that gets compressed significantly down to UI, some APIs, to an orchestration layer. And the intelligence is more and more on, as we call it, on the accelerator, if you will. So that's how we've been moving faster. And I firmly hold the belief that the more code we delete and turn into either prompts or better tuned models for what we're doing, that's how we win. Because we will be fundamentally 10x faster than any team trying to leverage developers, which no downside to developers, but that's the future. That's coming, so.
And so on that note, again, for our audience who are very heavily developers or dotted line connected, how do you recommend them to keep up?
So I think I would go back to me back in November 2022, which is the first feeling you get is one of defense because you feel threatened. And I would urge everyone to take a step back and think about how you can be the ultimate force multiplier for your entire organization. So when you build things, build them with the idea that you're not just building a final tool to give someone, you're giving them a malleable piece of Play-Doh, but that's set up in the way they want it, right? And let them modify it. So a simple relatable example is, for a lot of tools, you'll have a little search box because you have a list of things to find, right? And the story arc of every product that has that search bar is you add little filters and you add little drop downs if you find me everything, all the jobs that are completed or with errors or whatever, right? Do that, but ask yourself this. It's slow today, but what if that code that ran the filtering actually just ran on an LLM? At this point, everyone's uncomfortable. He's like, what? Like, that's a Python module. Like, why would I do that in LLM? But imagine next to that search box was a little edit button. And anyone who was using that search box could customize how that box prioritized what it does in the search results, right? It's like a completely new way of building software. And I would urge everyone in the room to really like rethink everything you do from that lens of you're not here to just build a final product. You're here to really build something that accelerates your organization by empowering everyone there. And I promise you, Microsoft has not paid me to say that word again and again, but it's true. So that's what I would say is like, don't take it as a threat. Take it as a way to suddenly hit pause and rethink all that crappy procedural CRUD code you were writing, and you can kind of reimagine how software is built. This is your opportunity to do that and to lead in doing that. I'm sorry? So imagine like a ETL tool.
The book.
The book. Oh, it's not a book. It's a one-page memo called The Bitter Lesson. Yeah.
Bitter lesson.
Richard Sutton.
Thank you. So Chris, I would maintain a similar flavor, but again, put a twist to it. When I personally look at someone like leveraging LLMs, there can be two like forked ways of thinking about it. One, how are you unlocking that new use case? Or how are you thinking in a product-centric way? And the second is, how do you think in a tech-centric way? Like, should I bring LLM as a tool into the problem that I'm solving? Or should I think about building a net new product that LLM can unlock? Do you see these differently? Or do you see these as levers of the same observation?
Yeah, that's a great question. We look at it from both angles as Unstructured, but like, I still remember seeing one of my favorite tweets, which was somebody had written like, hey, I've just been working with Claude. I've written all this iOS code. I've got this application. I'm ready to launch it. Where do I paste the code? And I'm just like, oh yeah, you've got bigger problems. You're not going to turn into a developer overnight if you're wondering where you paste the code out of Anthropic. But for us, like the first thing we did with Unstructured is, we write the Python modules because they're ridiculously fast, they're ridiculously cheap, and I don't have to worry about begging Microsoft for GPT-4o quota every 3 weeks. So
it's a real problem. It's a real problem.
Right, it is. So we write the Python, and then we also do the work to do the OCR, the computer vision, to do the document translation as well. And then the LLM comes to bear when we absolutely need it to do. But yeah, like similar thing, our organization is revolutionized through software development supported by LLMs. We enhance the product with the LLM. We have like a third method. We call it a platinum transform. The software team are all using it for development. Yeah, and I just think back to like the Sam Altman quote at the Open AI Day saying like, develop for the products that you think GPT-5 will be, GPT-6 will be. These new features are going to be there. So don't be investing too heavily in a lot of the code things that Kiran's talking about, because there's a GPT capability probably coming next month that unlocks it.
One quick thing to add to that point is a really good way to think about that is how you should be building stuff that currently just barely kind of works with the tech that exists and is probably broken. Then you're probably just the right amount ahead of what's coming. So it should be a little broken. If it's not a little broken, you're too slow. Move faster.
And the thing that Kiran said before about usability, like what happens when everybody's application is powered by an LLM? It's like how great that UX is, how close you are to your customer, how much they love that experience that you've built. We're going to get to a point where that is the differentiator between a loved product and a not loved product, because they're all powered by an LLM with minimal software written around it.
Actually, Viren, I would want to go deeper on this, on the risk factors specifically with you. So one, of course, how do you trade off this decision, whether to LLM or not to LLM? And in each of those cases, what are the risks that we are solving for? Or what are the risks that you solve for?
As in like using LLM for product development or?
Yes. So again, on a prioritization matrix, if you're thinking, one, what's your approach of like looking at something? Is it like the product and the use case will take dominance on what you and your team is going to build? Or is it the tech of how you're going to build it? Which one takes dominance? And then depending on what you select,
I think
What risks do you weigh?
I think for me, it's always about like you have to solve a real customer problem. So that's always the topmost priority. Now, to solve that problem, if language models can do it faster, then yeah, you do the route. But if it's not there yet, then you do, as you said, right? Like just do whatever it takes, and knowing that in future it is going to get solved. I still remember dealing with the GPT 3.5 where certain things just didn't work, but we kept on pushing. 4.0 just works. We removed all the code that was there to fix things. It just works out of the box. So again, going back, right? Customer is the priority. Look at the pain points that it is solving. Because if you're not solving a pain point, you're just solving a problem that does not exist. Yeah.
Interesting. And so, like specifically, what I wanted to understand is how do you weigh how much investment is a good investment? Like, for instance, what you mentioned with 3.5, it worked, but then you went a step beyond. You solved all the like issues that we're having because of performance, but then that was the right investment because it would have created a differentiation in the market. So how do you trade right now? 4.0 is the standard, but tomorrow something else is going to be. So how do you trade off whether additional investment on top of 4.0 is the right investment to make or not?
I think one is like right now we are, for example, making not quite a bit of investment on top of 4.0, right? Like how we leverage, knowing that like a lot of these things are going to get simplified with the next generation models. But so the idea is like I try to find the words, but like I'm looking ahead 2 years from now, 3 years from now, right? Like we are, so Orkes is in the business of, how do we allow developers to build and run applications, right? So when I think about what the future should or might look like 2 or 3 years down the line, so we have to start building it now, which would mean that like, we'll probably build a very scrappy product. It may not feel right. There could be rough edges, but as kind of the models evolve, it is going to get polished. But when it does, we'll be right there. So, that's the investment in future, knowing that like, it's not going to be ready for now. In fact, that's the backstory of the Orkes and the Conductor product also is, right? When we built Conductor at Netflix, not a lot of people understood why we were building it, because we knew that, we were almost 4 to 5 years ahead of the industry. And when we started Orkes, it was already a 5-year-old open source project, and everybody else was like, I need it right now. They were seeing it. So we knew like that's in our DNA to know that you should build now what you might need 3 years from now, because when you have it, you're going to be there ahead of everybody else.
Very interesting. And so building on this similar theme now, Chris, I would pose a question to you. When you think about 3 years roadmap, what are the biggest things that you are getting ready for, what you are gearing up for, or Unstructured is gearing up for? What is going to change the landscape of like using AI on unstructured data and then empowering use cases?
Yeah, I hope in 3 years this is IPO'd and I'm on a yacht somewhere and not worrying about LLMs that have probably taken over the world. And I'm wondering when the asteroid is coming to end our time here. Where we are with it is agentic workloads, what everybody's talking about. Like we think about synthetic parsing. How do we break a document up into its constituent parts? There's a text, here's an image, here's a table. How can we separate it out? Send it to the best model for the job. Drive that sign you see in a restaurant where there's always an angry chef that says cheap, fast, good, choose 2. Choose 1, you can have cheap and fast, but you're not getting good. We're trying to do that with agents and synthetic parsing of documents. Object detect the document, break it up into pieces, farm the work out to multiple transformation strategies, then bring them back together to be the cheapest, fastest, best representation of that document.
Interesting. Kirat, how about you? 3-year roadmap.
Oh, geez. The world's going to look very different. So I'll start there. If I had to bet, all of our predictions are going to be wrong. I'll start there. Gosh, that's a difficult question to answer, because at least what I feel people look for is like some sort of concrete picture of where I think the world will be. The best I can give you is this. I think our mental calculus of how we think about human time and energy versus computational time and energy is going to fundamentally turn upside down. What I mean by that is I'll pick something that is near and dear to how we think about our company's future. I talked about, messy Excel files and crappy data being ingested into a data warehouse. We're starting at the lower left of the graph of messy files on the one axis, right, but smaller stuff. But if you solve that, the only thing stopping you from basically fully automating all of ETL is cost, right? And that's falling 10x just in general without a focused effort on a problem. So imagine a world where all this code we're writing for classical CPUs can just run as an LLM. If you had infinite instances of LLMs with huge contexts, just assume for a second, fly to fancy. Why would you ever write code again? Code's garbage. I'm sorry, it's bad. Like we sit there and a small part of the human population has to learn for years to write good code. We still make mistakes. We still have buffer overflows in our most popular browser, Chrome. Like it still happens. Why does that need to exist? And if you put aside everything that's been burned into us over our careers and the things we currently claim to love, then the larger question becomes, if the cost of the LLM is effectively going to zero, cost of compute is going to zero, with the $100 billion investments Microsoft is making, among others, then what will be left of what we write code for, right? Will we write code for nuclear reactors? Probably. But will we write code for, I don't know, the app that we use to, sign up to enter the office today, right? Then it gave you a little QR code. You're not going to write code for that. And when you apply that lens to it, the world's going to look very different. Our data centers are going to look very different. I think the companies that make silicon are going to look, the winners and losers are going to look very different. So I tend to think about it from that scale and then bring it back down to what we are doing. And for what we're doing, my bet is everything happens on accelerators. I have a small team of engineers that actually orchestrate all of this and have a large team of people who understand my customers' problems and can just talk to the machine and make it do what it needs to do. Or maybe ideally the machine just figures it out, but I'm not sure 3 years we'll get there. But that's kind of where I see the world, right? So yeah.
Interesting. That's very interesting. Hopefully, when we are still writing code for reactors, that'll keep some of the confusion about whether all the developer jobs are going away.
Okay, so I'll posit this. How many billions of dollars have gone into the Chrome's code base in C++? It's probably the most instrumented C++ code base with guardrails for memory overruns ever, right? And we still have those. At some point, at what point will we question that it is unsafe for humans to write the code that drives our nuclear reactors? That's the question, right? It's a similar arc as self-driving cars. And in some ways, you can even question self-driving cars are an AGI problem. Because fundamentally, you need to understand the human waving at you from their car across the street or whatever, right? And so those are the larger questions. If you are willing to look at a world where some of those things have become true, then our basis assumptions around the economics of the world change. And what we do for a living changes. And in just this microcosm, our value in the workforce changes. So it's good to start thinking about it now.
It is. And on that note, a lot of folks here have like open source projects. At some point, hopefully it'll convert into a startup or something massive. If you were to start today, given the universe that we are now living in, from that perspective, what would you suggest them, or what would be your guidance?
Okay, so coming back to today, couple of pithy things I can say. What I said earlier, go-to-market will eat your technology for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So aim to figure out who is interested in what you're building. Why do they care? Chances of why they care are not why you think they care. Solve for that first. I'm saying this to a room full of engineers because I know all of you guys are probably pretty good at what you do. You're here on an evening, 8 p.m., right? Yeah, you care. But the biggest blind spot I had was we started the company thinking, okay, this is what the tech can solve today. Let me package it for what customers want, right? And we'd have these like internal intense debates of like my go-to-market team saying, hey, this doesn't work because of blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, dude, this is what the tech can do today. We have to make it work, right? And you have to find this balancing point of whatever you build. And this is especially true with LLMs. What works today that you can package in a way that is useful to your customers? Solve that. Number two, pick the right place to build stuff. I'm gonna say something that's gonna sound like, because I'm sitting here on a Microsoft for startups thing, but along the theme of go-to-market, Microsoft has been great to us from a partnership perspective. And if I were to pick a cloud to build on for my next startup, it'd be Microsoft. And
No sponsorship money.
no, absolutely not, right? But the reason is, I can figure out the tech. I can find great technical people to figure out the tech, right? The hard part is getting the customers. So, and that Microsoft has been great to us for. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. That's we undersee the problem of go-to-market a lot of times, especially as technologists, we always do. And so, Chris, you are in a very unique position. You are the head of product marketing, but you also are the head of like DevRel. What would you recommend to our audience here if they are to start a company or if they are to invest in a company in some form and function today? What should they be considered about?
Yeah, look, I've been in startups where we were begging people to use the software, and startups like Unstructured, where it's just wild, immediate product market fit. And you know, we hear all the cliches like focus on your customer, listen to what they want. I'm a big believer that half of this is luck. Like if somebody didn't write the RAG paper, if the timing wasn't right when GPT got released, Unstructured would probably have remained irrelevant forever. But the RAG paper gets dusted off, LLMs come along, and the world's on fire. I'm a big believer there. Half of this is timing, chance, luck. Half of it is great execution and getting that feedback that you need. The best thing that we did was start with the open source. And the open source project gets out there, get very excited. Oh, it's got 10 GitHub stars. Oh, it's got 1,000. Oh, it's got 1 million downloads. Oh, it's got a lot of angry people on Reddit telling us what's wrong with it. Thousands of them. You know, so it's like, it was the best method to get that feedback. So I still think half of it's luck. If you get the luck and you get that timing right, open it up to as many people as you possibly can. And open source was gold for us for that. Just an endless mine of information of people using it. And I'd even get people, because we'd open sourced it, coming to us and being like, I hate this thing. The transform isn't working, but I really want it to work because you're open source and we love the brand and what you're doing. And they'd stick with us. They'd sit on calls with me for hours going through lines of code and tweaking it to what they wanted. It was amazing. The open source community has been like a massive driver of the success, paired with luck.
Wow. Viren, the question couldn't have been like teed better for you. You have lived this life. I mean, this is literally the basis behind Orkes.
Yep.
What would you recommend specifically for also for the open source developers here who will be looking to like commercialize at some point? What should they be considerate of?
So I think, you know, having kind of lived through this, when you build an open source project and you start to see adoption and you start thinking about building a company, the first thing that comes to your mind is, I need to protect this. Should I change the license? I would say don't do that. We all seen through that, right? If your product is right, like if it's really solving the problem, if you're really helping the community, people are going to come to you no matter what. There is like enough, if you have enough people using your product, even if they are not paying for it, they are acting as ambassadors. They are giving you great feedback. They are helping you product development. You get instant feedback. So I think the number one thing that I would say is do not try to go down the route of I want to change the licensing so that only I can use and nobody else. And we have all seen, right? Every time companies have done it, there are forks and people being very unhappy about it, and it just goes down a different route. So one of the reasons, like we always kept the license to be completely open source, and I don't think there is any impact of it. Like those who don't want to pay will never pay no matter what. And those who really are, you know, if you're really providing a value as a provider, they will come to you. You don't have to worry too much about it. Of course, as you said, solving a technical problem is one thing. Finding customer is altogether a different ballgame. So And again, like finding a right partner also is important. I think, again, going back to what you said, right? Microsoft has been a great partner, and we look at them less about technical solution, um, more about go-to-market partnership, right? I think that becomes very important, especially when you are a founder or a co-founder. You would rather build a kick-ass product rather than try to figure out the product market fit. It's really hard to solve. It's really hard to find people. I'm looking at you, but
It's emotionally exhausting.
it's I would say good product marketing people are unicorns. Not very easy to find. Yes.
It's fun that you're looking at Chris while you're saying that.
Yeah, I'm just amazed.
Lovely. So
I
with
don't think we'd be invited back if we poached people from the panel, right?
wow. Thank you so much for the discussion. At this point, Bill, are we open to taking questions from the audience? How are we doing? Oh, lovely. Thank you. So actually, would be happy to facilitate questions from the audience. If anyone has questions, I can tee up and make sure that our panelists are engaged while you guys think about the questions. But who would want to go first? If you have any questions okay, perfect.
Was it? Oh.
All right, there are questions. It wasn't a complete flop, Start there.
Yeah, okay. So I think all three of you touched on the topic of the efficiency of models, and specifically spoken about where models are going to the future with the hypothetical that the cost of running these models approaches zero, and that you have a near infinite variety of models to choose from, so forth. How are all three of you thinking about this topic in regards to programming languages being either an intermediate, something that's generated, that's then used for software, whether it's running a nuclear facility or something else, versus just relying on LLMs indefinitely, especially because you have to sort of have confidence in the systems, even if it's a system that's not mission critical?
I have very strong feelings about this, so I'm sorry, I'm gonna jump in here. So I'll start by saying we have bet our company 100% on sending everything through an LLM. That is what we're building, and we're going to do that for data. We are going to do ETL through an LLM, not code gen. That full stop. That's our strategy. And the hypothesis behind that strategy is that I'll explain it in an analogy. This term copilot has taken over our industry, and we've kind of been told, oh yeah, copilot, it rides with you and helps you fly the plane better, right? But guess what? If you take any commercial airline today, the pilot sometimes has to go pee, and they close the door, they block the cockpit, and they go to the bathroom, and the plane flies itself. No, it doesn't. The co-pilot is sitting there flying the plane, right? And that's one. The second piece of that is we've been sold this term autopilot, and everyone's mental model is autopilot equals a plane flies itself. No, autopilot is heading hold effectively in most planes. It'll fly into a mountain if there's no human there, right? And so putting those things together, my hypothesis is that if you lean on code gen as a crutch, and I know I'm in the minority in the industry, 100%. If you lean on code gen as a crutch, what you're effectively saying that your product is not for everyone. It is for developers, except just fewer developers, because something will go wrong. When it does go wrong, who can fix it? A developer. Now, that is, again, if you buy the assumption that something will go wrong. Now, if I talk about our strategy around data, if something goes wrong in the data, can I instead design a user interface where anyone in the organization can fix that data? At the end of the day, something went wrong, a human had to get involved. The question is, what kind of human? And so my personal bet on that is, if you do code gen, you're going to need more developers. Your product's not moving the needle significantly enough to the future where we're headed. If you do it natural language, or visual language, whatever is the future, right? Language is a point in time today. Whatever that is, ambient computing, whatever you want to call it. I think that's the right bet to make. At least that's the bet I made. So
In our game, we're transforming documents that matter to people, doctor's notes, contracts, insurance documents. The LLM's not always the best choice. There's a good chance the other day I transformed some financial accounts, sent it to an LLM, and then there was a lot of talk about spacemen in it the other side that were not present in the original financial accounts documents. So the Python and OCR, traditional object detection, still has a place for us. When we need 100% accuracy with zero risk and determinism, the Python still plays its part. This is an English phrase. I don't know if it adapts very well to America, but we say horses for courses, like the best racehorse on the right ground. So we're just like trying to bring the right tool to bear in the right problem space at the moment, but with an eye to what Kiran's saying about longer term, more and more reliance on an LLM. But there are places where Python is still the way for us. It's the fastest, it's the cheapest. And if you're extracting text from a document that's there, you're just lifting it out of a schema. You're not going to do it quicker with an LLM. You're not going to do it more accurate. There's going to be no mistakes with the code.
Very interesting. I didn't know that this panel would also be teaching me new English phrases beyond Gen AI. Thank you for that, Chris. Yes, next question.
Yeah, I just want to double click on this because this is the key, right? How to use LLMs efficiently. So like, for example, you could aspire to use LLMs and nothing but LLMs and aspire not to use developers to use the crutch, right? To do the crutch. But then like how far can you go with that? Like, and so you mentioned self-driving cars, right? So there was the craze of self-driving cars in tech just maybe 2-3 years ago. Everybody thought we will be driving self-driving cars by now, and we're not, right? Because there is this long tail of corner cases, right, that LLMs cannot really solve, and without it, there is really no autonomy like level 5 or something like that, right? So without this full autonomy, this use case is not really adding value, right? So can you double click on this crutches, right? Like how simple crutch can be for a non-developer to create it, right? Because like as Sergey Brin gave interview and he basically characterized LLM right now is that everybody's using it and they're like, oh my God, it's amazing, right? And then they're like, but it does like 90% of the things kind of right? So am I really gonna use it? Am I really gonna change my workflow for this 90%? Whereas this last mile, right? Last 10% is the most hard one, and you can maybe do 95% with non-developer crutches, right? But the last fraction of percent, like how easy it is, do you think in your experiments for non-developers to make this crutch with LLMs? And not to mention like nobody's using LLMs as there is retrieval augmented generation, right? Where you have to use vector database, right? To give the context to LLMs because LLMs are held to retrain, right? So like all of that, like how do you think about this last mile, the most difficult crutch to make?
So I can answer that question from a couple of places. I'll start by saying, I don't know if I'm right. I'm probably wrong, right? And we're probably going to fail. All of those facts remain true. All of that said, few things hold true. My Model 3 drove me here hands-free from Capitol Hill to this building today. I did not interrupt the driving at all. Last time I was in San Francisco, I rode in a Waymo. Is that a generally globally deployed solution? No, we're far from it, but point solutions are real and live today. Now, second piece I would say is that last 10%, I think it's a new way of building software. And we don't actually know if there are innovations in user experience that can help you cross that last chasm of 10%. That is just a different way of building user experience to solve it. Next, I don't know what AGI is. I don't know how to define it. I'm not even betting on that's going to happen. My point is the technology that exists today, that is like if all progress stopped, there is a vast amount of things that you can do with these things that exist today. If Hugging Face stopped committing to the repo tomorrow and Zuckerberg gave up on Llama, you can still change the world with what exists today. And I don't think we've given that enough thought at what that can be. And I will agree with Likun there on Yeah, LLMs are probably not it, but it's a starting gun. There's so much more to do here. What we've really discovered is differentiable compute that we can effectively, is Turing complete. We can throw compute indefinitely at it, and we don't know the top of the scaling boundary yet. So it comes down to Pascal's wager. Like, do you bet for or against scaling? And what is your outcome against it? And to me, the only safe bet, which is why, by the way, Microsoft, Google, Meta are all blowing billions into it, is they're making the Pascal's wager and saying it's worse to not make that bet than it is to make that bet. So you better make that bet. That's how I think about it.
Very interesting.
I love that. That's great. Same. Model Y to the airport, no problem. Love Waymo.
Wow. Oh, perfect.
It sounds like a few of your companies are working on ETLs. I'm just wondering, how do you think data formats, schemas will evolve in the world of LLMs going forward? Right now, there seems to be a lot of room for improvement, it sounds like.
I can go. So everything we do transforms to a canonical JSON schema. So whether we take a PowerPoint file, a Word document, whatever we take, you get the same canonical JSON schema. So then you've got this like deterministic interface from this messy world of unstructured data. That's covered pretty much every use case we've faced so far. And then we just have an extensible metadata framework that surrounds it. So if you want to do named entity extraction, sentiment, whatever traditional NLP tricks you want to do, pull them out, extensible metadata. And that one schema that we're highly opinionated about, and I call beautiful, and people laugh at me for calling the JSON schema beautiful, is solving, like I say, it's deployed in 87 of the Fortune 100 today, 270 of the Fortune 500. Like the use of it is huge, and that schema is becoming prevalent, and it's entirely open.
Awesome. We'll potentially take one question, and then we'll break out so that people can start interacting. Yes, please.
Yeah. Are there any tools that would allow me as a developer to talk to, for example, development environment and agent would generate some kind of code and then compile and then so for example, I could go for a walk in the park with a handheld device and talk to AI agent, and it would be writing code for me and would compile and give me feedback, and kind of like doing engineering verbally versus with keyboard, right? With keyboard or mouse. So it would be verbal interaction with development environment. I was wondering if there are tools, or is somebody developing that kind of tools?
I spent 2 weeks ago, I spent Saturday at Anthropic's office, and Dario was there. It was like a Menlo Investor Day, and some guys from Replit were there. I don't know if any of you have been using that, but they couple that with computer control. So they were literally saying, hey, Replit, build me an e-commerce website. Replit would throw out 7 code files, deploy it, and then Claude Computer Control would look at it, see what the error was, feed back into the prompt, it would make the change, and it was live in a cycle. Like it wasn't a voice interface, but it wouldn't be a step to do that, where it was literally, tell it what you want. It wrote code, used Claude Computer Control to see the screen, fed that back into the prompt, made code changes, and just was evolving itself in front of you. And it was, like you said, it was the app that gets you through the door. It's probably not Claude doing the nuclear reactor code yet, because it was also doing some really crazy things.
That's the keyword.
yeah, it's the keyword. But yeah, like Replit like that with Claude Computer Control integration is quite an amazing thing to see.
Perfect. With that, it feels like it's perfect time to break out. Awesome. But really appreciate Kirat, Chris, Viren. Thank you so much for joining on this panel. I hope that this was interesting discussion and a lot of eye-opening discussion for the panel. And thank you so much.
Thank you.